The Saudi Arabian Grand Prix might have seen a spectacular debut for one promising Brit, but the most successful English driver of all time had a really difficult day. Lewis Hamilton is incredibly frustrated with the 2024 Mercedes, and big changes are needed if he wants to win a race this season. So let's take a look at Lewis Hamilton's poor start to the season, why Mercedes are so slow, and whether Mercedes can actually get into race-winning contention this season. 2023 could not have gone much worse for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. The team persisted with a design different to the rest of the grid, and it certainly did not pay off. They were on the back foot the entire year, and Lewis had his second consecutive season without a win. There was hope heading into 2024 that things could change. Mercedes looked promising towards the end of the year, and they had completely changed their design philosophy. While that didn't stop Lewis agreeing to go to Ferrari at the end of this year, he still looked like he could be in race-winning contention in 2024. But so far, that hasn't worked out for either Mercedes driver. While George Russell has been able to get slightly more out of the car, the 7-time world champion is struggling massively. Lewis could only manage 7th in the first race of the season, with both Mercedes drivers struggling with engine cooling and battery issues. It was an even worse performance in Saudi Arabia. Lewis couldn't qualify any higher than 8th and was less than a tenth of a second from being knocked out of qualifying by 18-year-old Oliver Bearman. In the race, he was overtaken by the youngster and ended up finishing in 9th place. Throughout the race, Lewis maintained solid pace and a different strategy. The Mercedes team clearly knew they were not fast enough to get onto the podium on merit, so they went with a different strategy. Hamilton ended up doing an extra long stint on some worn medium tyres, as his team were hoping a safety car would give him a cheap pit stop. The safety car didn't come, and so Lewis ended up 2 seconds behind the McLaren of Lando Norris. You can't really put down this poor start to anything other than Mercedes being slow. Red Bull and Ferrari have been the fastest teams to start the season, and it looks like McLaren are faster than Merc so far. Fernando Alonso's good start to the season means Mercedes are really struggling. Why are Mercedes so slow? Well, if you watched the race on Saturday, it's pretty easy to see what the big issue with the W15 is. While Mercedes looked solid in the slow-speed corners, they really struggled in the fast-speed corners. Merc was one of the slowest teams in the first and second sectors, struggling with a large number of high-speed corners the Jeddah-Corniche circuit features. There are plenty of tracks featuring as many or even more high-speed corners on the calendar, so Mercedes need some big changes. There were also a few complaints from both Mercedes drivers about bouncing, similar to the aerodynamic issues Mercedes faced last season. Mercedes technical director James Allison believes that the problem relates to the car's rear suspension not being able to handle the quick change that comes with high-speed corners. It was very noticeable on Saturday that Lando Norris had a big advantage in the first sector. There are certainly a few aerodynamic changes that Mercedes made heading into this season. They completely redesigned the aerodynamic package of the car after struggling massively last year. It seems like this could be the main area where Mercedes are having some problems. One of the interesting things is that Mercedes seemed to get slower throughout the weekend in Saudi Arabia. George Russell spoke about the issues that the team had through the weekend. Russell said, "We're still really trying to understand this car because we've shown true performance at points over the last 2 weekends." The Mercedes driver added, "FP1 straight out of the box, we were top of the timesheets and always in the top 3. FP2, P2. Then both weekends the pace just falling away from us. That hasn't been our competitors getting faster. That's been us getting slower." Mercedes' 7-time world champion had been fairly critical of the car. After a very disappointing race in Saudi Arabia, Hamilton said that the car was miles off in the high-speed corners. Hamilton added, "It was like I was in a different category when I was going through the high speed between the other guys around me, so it's frustrating for sure to be 3 years in a row almost in the same position." What will particularly upset Hamilton is his performance related to his teammate George. George seems to be able to get slightly more out of the car even if Mercedes still aren't in the position they want to be. In Saudi Arabia, 9th place was about where the car was for Lewis most of the weekend. The blistering pace that we saw in practice mainly came from George. Despite the fact that he is moving to Ferrari at the end of this year, Lewis will have been very involved in the development of the W15. We know that the seat position being moved in the car is partly down to requests he's made over the last few years. What is particularly frustrating for Lewis is that the team are in the same position as they were over the last few years. Mercedes reverted back to a less risky development strategy this year, and it hasn't paid off. They are just as fast as they were in 2023 while running the zero sidepod design. Team boss Toto Wolff admits the team don't know why they are struggling in high-speed corners, saying, "There is something which we don't understand. We know that we have a smaller rear wing, but it's just at high speed where we're losing all the lap time." It does at least highlight one positive for Mercedes. They are fast in the slow and medium speed corners, so Mercedes don't really need to make huge changes. They will also benefit from the fact that there are a lot of tracks which don't have the same number of high-speed corners. Maybe things are not all that bad for Merc, but they need to make some changes to improve on similar tracks to Jeddah. Mercedes will be concerned about the performance related to the rest of the grid. While Toto Wolff's team were able to pip Ferrari to second place last year, it looks like the best they're going to be able to do this year is third. But that won't be easy. For one thing, McLaren have made a much faster start this year than they did last year. By the end of 2023, Zak Brown's team were the second fastest in the grid. They have one of the most exciting young driver lineups in the sport and are already ahead of Mercedes in the constructors' standings. There are going to be plenty of tracks on the calendar that suit McLaren more than they suit Mercedes. While Aston Martin was slower than Mercedes in the first race of the season, Fernando Alonso showed off his pace to come home 5th in Saudi Arabia. While Lance Stroll looks like he's going to once again hold his father's team back from finishing in the top 3, Fernando certainly looks like he can take some points off of the Mercedes drivers this season. If the Silver Arrows get behind their competitors too quickly, it may be too big of a mountain to climb. This year was never going to be an easy one for Mercedes or Lewis Hamilton, considering his surprise move to Ferrari was announced prior to the season. Knowing that your superstar driver is leaving at the end of the year means it will be difficult for Mercedes to want to invest in Lewis this year. He's not going to add his 8th world title in 2024, and so Mercedes will be thinking slightly more about the future. The fact that George Russell has been the faster of the two drivers could be because Mercedes are focusing on his development with the hope of being that he would lead the team after Lewis departs. It could also be down to Lewis himself struggling to buy into the 2024 car. He knows his future is not with Mercedes anymore. While his move to Ferrari certainly looks like a smart one now, it's going to be a tough year for Lewis Hamilton and his team. What do you think about Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes' struggles this season? Put your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're down there, hit the like button and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.